This exciting episode, it's a spring-autumn romance for the ages. Patricia Barry's got her velvet claws sunk in young Carl Held, and all this is gonna result in Perry getting a new law clerk. It's Perry Mason, Season 4, Episode 27, The Case of the Grumbling Grandfather. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel if the episode was an adaptation. We give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, and revel in a Perry proverb. That's a pearl of wisdom from the man himself. Before we head to the water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our fave legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the law library! Each time we go to the law library, we investigate a legal conundrum so that we can find precedents for future cases. In this visit to the law library, we take a look at switching legal representation. In this episode, Perry gets called in from the legal defense bullpen while the preliminary hearing is still going down.
Now, this may not take over an hour of your time, but I'll pay you anything you want if you'll only get here quickly.
Where are you, Mr. Gideon? But hasn't the hearing already... Oh, I see. Yes? Yes, I will.
Are there any rules regarding when or how a defendant can change legal representation? The answer? It's a matter of timing. During a preliminary hearing, of course, defendants are allowed to have a lawyer represent them. This right to have a lawyer is protected by U.S. law at every important stage of the legal process. The specific rules for when and how a new lawyer can step in might differ, but generally, the court has the ability to approve the change, and it's usually okay if the new lawyer is ready to go and doesn't need to push back the court's schedule significantly. In Perry's case, he can take over during a preliminary hearing or just after it if he meets all the requirements and the judge agrees without it causing any issues. And the truth is, if a judge sees Perry standing next to a murderer in a trial, he or she might as well pencil in a confession from one of the witnesses in a few days' time. Because one thing's for sure, that defendant isn't guilty. Now, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Grumbling Grandfather. J.J. Gideon, man, myth, legend. Otto Kruger knows how to crash an office building late at night. There's people messing with his company electric bill after all, and we've got a straight out of central casting hapless security guard. Plus, JJ thinks people are nipping his liquor.
Some of the folks are working late, I guess.
Well, I'm not.
You mean there's a light up in your office? You wait. I'll take a look, sir.
No, you don't. That cleaning woman is nipping my whiskey. I'm going to catch her myself, thank you.
Who happens to be in his office? It's David Bowie as Carl Held in David Gideon, Blackstone's apprentice. Exposition?
You mean to say you came here to read, to study?
Well, don't look so surprised. You always said come in, help myself anytime I wanted to. Sure, what can a guy do but read? There aren't any good pictures in Blackstone.
I'm sorry, David. You know, I never realized that you were back in law school.
Well, I've been thinking about it. I mean, I spoke to the dean, and it's just a matter of making up an examination or two.
You can do it, too.
Grandpa's mighty proud, and he even offers some of his precious liquor, before the other office ne'er-do-wells get to it.
You want a nightcap? When you get through, you just help yourself, because, after all, the watchman will get it if you don't.
But when Grandpa's away, Gideon will play, and is that Patricia Barry hidden away in a back room? David, say it ain't so!
Grandfather would absolutely kill me. He'd have me skin fried and basted in acid.
But Grandpa's on to young Dave. He shares his worries with the bespectacled Gavin MacLeod. You know, because MacLeod, who portrays Lawrence Comminger, is an accountant and all, and he's the man that's supposed to calculate how far behind the old 8-ball recently deceased Lucius Gideon has placed the Gideon Company. We discover Uncle Lucius committed suicide, but JJ has hopes for David.
You were right about his Uncle Lucius. He was ill, weak, and foolish. But David is different. David can be like his own father used to be.
It appears Doreen has him wrapped around her finger, though. David is Joe College. When he finds dashing Doreen getting away, it's all he can do not to tremble. You give me fever, baby.
Don't you know how I feel about you?
Yes, David. Every time you look at me, you shake.
David has one simple request. Come to the Red Ox for lunch. But before that can happen, there's a fight with Doreen's husband, gambler, and domestic abuser extraordinaire. Tony, cue the Rock'em Sock'em co-ed.
Hey, you! Let go! Beat it, kid. Listen, I said let go!
Did he hurt you?
No,
Are you all right? What's that guy trying to do?
you idiot, he's my husband.
Doreen comes into the Red Ox later with a shiner and a simple request, $10,000.
All right, so maybe you are a couple of years older than I am. But I'm going to help you whether you like it or not.
Can you help me find $10,000, David?
Also, David gets carded.
Excuse me, sir. May I see your driver's license?
JJ and David get down to brass tacks. JJ lays his cards on the table.
She's been chasing you ever since she set eyes on you.
Granddad, I've been chasing her.
A boy of your age never comprehends what a woman like that does.
Well, Doreen breaks in to tell David she's got great news. She landed the cash. But as for celebrating with David, things don't go quite like they're supposed to. Cry him a river, Doreen.
He laughed at me. He wouldn't stop laughing.
Tony, that was Tony.
I went to his place. I gave him the money. He had all the papers I wanted right in his hands, in a brown envelope, and then he just put it back in the bureau drawer and he started laughing.
All right, he wouldn't give you the envelope.
I begged with him. I argued with him, and then he hit me, and then he made me get back in the car.
David goes a snooping at Tony's place, gets conked on the head, and wakes up to find Tony gone to that great bill collection agency beyond the blue. Ruh-roh. Next thing you know, David's in court, and JJ's so dissatisfied with David's legal representation, he calls in Perry from the courthouse. In court, Hamburger's holding court and getting anywhere he wants. Perry shows up to see what it looks like when Hamilton's actually winning a case, and Ham humble brags.
I really wasn't at my best today. You know how it is sometimes when almost too much evidence is on your side?
Maybe we should call it Hamble bragging? Paul and Perry convene at the murder scene and get young Gideon to walk him through the crime. But poor Dave's pretty hapless.
I hope you're not going to be too disappointed. I guess the only reason you could arrange this is because I didn't seem to remember certain things. Only, well, there just isn't much more I can tell you about what happened here.
Paul spots a dame in a beige coat who's been keeping tabs on the Tony estate. Dave pegs her.
Know who it is?
Yeah, it's a woman that does typing, I think, in my grandfather's office.
Perry finds Sue Franks, then discovered Sue's got a Tony connection. Tony's such a shadowy sort of figure after all. Perry then makes his way down to Las Vegas and hears some wisdom from Mr. Farrell. It seems like Tony wasn't good for the dough, but Doreen?
What else did the boys in your trade tell you?
They said push the guy hard enough and he'd push his wife. They said his wife, she always makes good.
Perry gets back to LA just in time to catch Sue Franks digging up some dirt, literally in the backyard of our murder victim's house. And it's not good news for Davy boy.
Well, actually, her explanation is quite simple. She knew where the envelope was because she saw a man hide it there the night of the murder. Your client, David Gideon.
Perry visits Dave in jail, and David is sporting approximately his 15th different hairdo in this episode. The problem? Now, JJ's involved. And then Perry drops this bombshell.
Your grandfather has a man checking into records. It begins to look as though your Uncle Lucius may have mismanaged his company out of nearly $100,000. Naturally, your grandfather wanted to keep it as quiet as possible until he has all the answers. Besides, he was thinking about you, about leaving you a good name.
Perry talks to Doreen outside of court, and we get a bit of faux insight from our femme fatale.
Mr. Mason, it's one thing to tell an attractive boy you're older than he is. It's quite another to tell it to yourself.
In court, Hamburger puts on his case by calling Lawrence Comminger, Doreen Hopkins, a nameless stroller, played by Dub Taylor.
Indeed, I did. I was walking Alexander. That's my wife's little dog. I wanted to be sure I was home in time for the news.
Fifi Dorsey, and she gives the testimony.
And then one of the men told the other, beat it, kid. And then him, David Gideon, he hit that Tony Montgomery so hard.
Sue Franks, she comes out with the fact that she saw a convertible drive from the premises. Let's find that driver. And then Mr. Farrell, who turns out to be the driver of said convertible.
Your Honor, I object to that. There's certainly been no foundation laid for that sort of a quiz program.
Fun burger objection. Quiz program. Ha! Then back to Lawrence. No!
I didn't ask if you met him, I asked if you killed him.
No.
And then we get Doreen chiming in before we get to the final no-off.
No, of course not. We hardly know each other.
Doreen, say it ain't so! As we head to our denouement, I'm not sure David has gotten the right lesson from his ordeal.
Well, at least when I get mixed up with a woman, it's sure a woman.
But at least we end on a high note. Make 'em proud, son.
Now look here, son.
Oh, I expect he'll be around to borrow a few more, Mr. Gideon.
Sure, Granddad. You may be proud of me yet.
Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul for this episode concerns law reading. Young David references Blackstone.
What's that?
Blackstone?
Yeah. Say, the moths really fly out of that one, don't they?
You see, you can tell he's really serious about studying law because he's reading Blackstone. You know, the law guy. Call me skeptical, but this is like someone announcing they're getting a PhD in literature by claiming to be reading War and Peace in their spare time. So let's say someone like young Gideon did want to read himself towards law school preparation. What books would he be likely to read? Let's call it a Family Feud category. Top 5 answers on the board. We asked 100 lawyers what book most signifies, I want to study law. And they said, let me know what you find, Pauls. Ardela's gotta be the one, the only Carl Held. David Gideon himself.
Look, if you don't think I'm even 21 years old.
Here's 10 about Carl. What's Carl's real name? He's credited as Carl with a K sometimes, Carl with a C at others. He's even occasionally credited as Christopher. What we do know, his birthday is 1931. He's alive and kicking still, so no obits yet. Born in New Jersey, father was German, mom had Austrian and German ancestors. He apparently grew up speaking German. When he later took German classes as an adult in London, his teacher reportedly told him, "You speak German, but it's so strange. You speak like a child." Held's dad died at 61. He had one younger brother. Number 2, apparently spent some time in Korea in 1952. Don't know whether that was in the military or not. He would have been 21, but his time there let him know death was a real thing. Number 3, back in the States, gets himself into theater in 1956, age 25. He's in a Broadway play called The World of Susie Wong, starring Sarah Marshall, daughter of actor Herbert Marshall and actress Edna Best. British. Held and Marshall fall in love. Marshall was married at the time to film art director Mel Bourne. By 1957, that marriage was over. Held and Marshall got married in 1964 and stayed married until Marshall's death in 2014. Number 4, as Perry fans know, of course, Held starred as Bruce Nesbitt earlier in season 4 as part of the case of the Angry Dead Man. This David Gideon character, after this episode, would come back in 8 different season 5 episodes before being written out of the show. Here's how Carl Held described it in an interview. "They wrote me in as a character," Held said. "I was supposed to bring all the teenagers in to watch, but on Saturday night at 7:30, teenagers were not at home watching television." Number 5, through the 1960s and 70s, Held appeared in over 50 films and television shows. Both he and Sarah Marshall had roles in different Star Trek episodes. Here's how the Trekkie Encyclopedia describes his role in the Return of the Archons episode. As Lindstrom, an Enterprise sociologist and member of the landing party to Beta 3 in 2267. Lindstrom studied the planet's society, helping to unravel the mystery of the culture's unusual behavior, and later stayed behind on the planet to help the population establish an independent society after the deactivation of the planetary computer, which had controlled them for a millennia. That episode is famous because it introduced the Prime Directive. Number 6, other shows and movies the guy appeared in: That Darn Cat, Falcon Crest, we'll talk about that later, Combat, The Outer Limits, The Girl from U.N.C.L.E., The Virginian, The Big Valley, I Spy, The FBI, Hawaii Five-0, Charlie's Angels, The Incredible Hulk. Number 7, in 1972, Marshall and Held moved to London, and you can find some nuggets about the couple and especially their love of cats in casting agent David Graham's memoir, Casting About. That's where I found that information. Number 8, the 1980s saw Carl Held in the role of Garth on the popular television series Falcon Crest. In fact, the best single source for finding out about Held was a lengthy interview with Held about Falcon Crest. I'll post the link to that in the show notes. Here's what he said. "It was a wonderful set. It was the best set I've ever been on. I think it was due a lot to my attitude. Once you start working regularly, you feel more relaxed, more comfortable. I've got the job, and you get to know people, and I made sure I got to know everybody, the lighting men, the electricians, the workers, everybody, even the gardeners who bring the plants and all that stuff, and the painters working on the set, as well as all the cast and the makeup people. I got to know everybody by first name. Also, all the people from the production office. I just thought, why not? I was having such a good time." Number 9, his final television appearance in the controversial Good to the Last Drop episode of LA Law in 1991. Number 10, Carl is apparently still alive and kicking at age 92. Our Perry for this episode concerns the man's fans. David, you see, is a believer. He's followed our intrepid hero's career since high school.
I bet I followed every case you ever defended since I was in high school. You have no idea how glad I felt when they told me you were actually going to defend me. I feel very confident. Sure hate to be the guy to spoil your record.
And guess what? Surprise, surprise. David doesn't ruin Perry's record. Our theme for this episode is grumbling. Let's start with the chief of the naysayers, Grandpa. Give us a few one-liners, Otto.
Oh, you're all the same, every one of you. Silk, perfume, a pretty leg. Off roll your heads like so many useless pumpkins. Oh, you poor, stupid young whelp. This cheap, conniving dame leads you around by the nose.
In general, there's just a lot of naysaying in this episode. By that I mean characters constantly keep saying no.
Only that boy has no chance at all.
No more than that.
I didn't touch any of the money, no.
No, I never thought of that.
And you know what? Grandpa is the one who's right. A lot of those naysayers are just upset they're getting called on their shenanigans. It's not grumbling if you're correct. Follow Grandpa's advice, young Davids. Save your negativity for the things that really deserve your judgment. Don't be a grumbler on principle, you young whelps. Now, it's time for a Perry proverb. Our Perry proverb comes down to honesty with your client. David can say he believes in Perry all he wants, but he's shielding Doreen, who turns out to be no murderess. And Perry's had enough. Lay it on the line, Perry.
David, you're scared to death, and you know it.
Perry knows Hamilton couldn't win a case against him if his life depended on it. He's not the one who's scared. Best come clean, son. Read your Blackstone. It's all in Blackstone, man. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each time we visit the water cooler, we give you deleted scenes, clips from the original script that didn't make the episode's final cut. We've got 3. Number 1, David and Noreen go back and forth doing J.J. Gideon impersonations.
You just make yourself comfortable, son. Pitch in.
Number 2, we follow Sue Franks and her mother as they go back to the racetrack for the first time without Tony. They spend their money on a bobtail nag. Tony, if you know him at all, would have bet on the bay. Number 3, Doreen gets offered a series of unappetizing dining options during her time behind bars, and she has the same reaction.
No! No! No!
Our Paul prompt from our last episode involved lie detector tests and the procedure used by the episode's expert.
Very good, Mrs. Gilman. Now, we'll repeat the same questions in the same order 2 more times, just to make sure of our results.
Was this 3 times a lady method for real? My dad did a deep dive, and he says nay. Quote, although the technology today is advanced to include the use of MRIs and artificial intelligence, for the administration of a lie detector test as depicted in the case of the duplicate daughter, the questions would only be asked once and would follow this protocol. The examiner has roughly 10 questions to ask. These questions will include 3 to 4 relevant questions, with the remainder being control questions. All are yes or no. We observed that on the episode. I thought you might find the list of most common questions asked during a polygraph of interest. Is your name blank? Typically a control question with information from the pretest. Are you blank years old? Do you suspect anyone of selling drugs? Is your cat's name Josie? Were you born in this year? And typically that year might be different than the math that would calculate out to the person's age. So you're asking them a kind of false answer question in order to see what their reaction is. Do you rent a house? Do you know who stole the drugs? Do you live on Vine Street in Iowa? Did you steal the drugs? Is today, fill in the day of the week. Now, the who stole the drugs, did you steal the drugs? Those would be the relevant questions. A question like, do you live on Vine Street in Iowa, could be a control question. A few of those questions would be purposefully misleading and would be included to determine the correct and incorrect answers. Fascinating. Thanks, Daddy-O. With that, let's get to some listener letters. We got a couple of YouTube comments. Longtime listener Banana Bob chimed in, quote, missed you for so long. Great to be back, B squared. New listener Nina wrote in, quote, I love everything about this. Love how your brain works, sir. Subscribe. Looking forward to digging more. End quote. Thanks for listening, Nina. Longtime listener April wrote in. She writes, quote, I was so happy to see your latest episode in my podcast queue. You pack a lot of information in 27 minutes. It was so enjoyable. It was interesting that, again, we had a private eye who took the information they found and tried to use it for their own enrichment. The same thing happened with Don Briggs in the case of the drowning duck. I wonder if this reflected private investigators of the era. I'm glad Perry doesn't have that problem with Paul. I really enjoyed your singing about the upcoming David Gideon. I'm ambivalent about him. I understand what they tried to do. My only fault with him is that sometimes it seems like the things he would say or recommend would normally be coming from Paul. I'm just glad that the Paul part does not become smaller. End quote. You and me both, April. Thanks for writing in. Trivia maven Nancy wrote in too. Hi, Jonathan. I was just thinking that your listeners might like to know how long it takes you to do an episode. I know I would. You put so much into researching actors and issues and comparing episodes to novels. Thanks for all the hard work. End quote. Thanks, Nancy. Generally takes me between 8 to 10 hours per episode, give or take. I probably watch the episode 3 times, especially these later season episodes that I'm less familiar with. I have a transcript made of the audio file, so it's easier to find clips when I put together the show. A week is just about perfect for that workflow. It allows there to be a response to the Paul prompt from my dad or Aunt Mai if they want to, and maybe some listener feedback in there as well. The goal is to make it so the workload on any given day in that week isn't particularly hard. Perry generally gets my remaining time, not the first cut of my day, and I've got to write a 2,500 word script for every episode. It would be an absolute mess for me to try and improvise the things I say about the plot or the trivia in any given episode. I'd lose the time having to edit out all my errors. And so when I sit down each week, I know I've got to churn out 2,500 words. If I have a novel for the week, I generally turn it into an audiobook by using a text-to-speech program, and then I make sure I listen for oddities. And most of those audiobooks only take 2 to 3 hours to go through at the speed I listen to them. It's never good if I sit down and my expectation is that I need to crank out all 2,500 words at once. I might do the plot on one day, the trivia section on another, and the research for the Della section of the trivia is always a variable. I expected there to be more info about Carl Held this week, for instance, but you can easily go down an internet rabbit hole for a couple of hours looking through info on lesser known actors or actresses, especially just trying to find the information. I record the raw audio for the script in about 30 minutes, and then I can knock out the editing and adding in the other clips in about 90 minutes or an additional 2 hours. I'm doing all that audio editing in free software. Sometimes things go haywire. I know listeners have heard sometimes when I've accidentally posted the raw recording or posted the audio without the clips edited in. So the best practice for me is listening through to the entire episode after I finish it before I post it, which I'll make sure to do this time around. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a comment on the episode or the pod in general? Drop me a line at theperrypod@gmail.com. And join us next time for the final episode of Season 4, a non-alliterative title that should give any Perry fan pause. And we start with a divorce case? Eesh, it's the case of the guilty clients. Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!